Welcome back to Rich Your Soul, Brad, and welcome, Adrian. Looking forward to chatting with you both today.
Thanks for having
So
us.
super pumped to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you both. We always like to start at the beginning. Everyone's heard Brad's story. So, Adrian, what was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
My parents, I love them so much. I actually hired them a few years ago. I talk to them every day. My parents are both Mexican. My dad immigrated here when he was 13. And although we didn't have a lot of things at first, I think the most important thing they taught me about money was that if I wanted to have nice things or do nice things, I could work for it. And so money was this tool, but they believed that here in this country, it's the reason my family immigrated here, was that we could actually change our class and our circumstance through work ethic and through receiving and being good with money. The other thing I learned from them that goes with that is what you do with your money. My parents were so good at saving. It's kind of funny, but my dad, if I look back at photos when I was a kid, he'd always wear his Toyota, almost looked like mechanical shirt. He worked at a Toyota dealership. It was in all family photos, and like for this stretch of like, damn, was he always working? No, I mean, he worked at a dealership and he came home, but he was so frugal. My parents, they didn't actually buy clothes. Like he would wear his work clothes like to family like barbecues and stuff. So I got to see this firsthand, and those are some of the most powerful things that habits that I've been able to adopt from them. I'm really lucky for that.
Did school teach you anything?
I don't think I can give much credit to school and money at all. I'm really trying to be on the side of school. Like school did help me out. The only thing I can think about is a mentor I had in college. His name's Craig Marty, and he was a marketing professor, and he came not just from academia. He was in business and he was teaching business, and he taught me about what a Roth IRA is. And he didn't teach me in the classroom, but I saw that he was successful and that he had past experience. So I went after his classroom and I asked him about money. I was willing to be vulnerable. I didn't know what I was asking. I didn't know what an ETF was, index fund. And I said, what's the first thing I should do if I want to start saving money? And I was like, how much do you have in the bank account? I was like, I think I got like $80. He's like, well, and then he told me about like budgeting, and he said like a Roth IRA is the first investment vehicle. And I learned it from him. So I give credit to having a leader in school like that, but it wasn't classroom curriculum. I still had to go and seek that desire for what else can I do with my money.
Funny how you go to business school and they don't teach money, huh? Out of curiosity, then did your dad didn't hand you money, I'm guessing, but did he give you opportunities to work at a young age, or like how did that get instilled?
My very first job was a parts runner at a Toyota dealership. I was 15 and a half. I think that was the soonest I could join. And I had this old school computer. It only had a light green and a dark green color. And a little queue would pop up. It would have a parts number. I'd have a scooter. I'd go over and put my whatever part in, and then I'd drive it over to whatever mechanic needed the part. So I did not have a choice when I was 15 and a half. I'm sure I complained I wanted to play Tekken and Final Fantasy on PlayStation or whatever. I didn't have a choice. When I was 15 and a half, my dad had the job lined up for me and I was working. And then after that summer job ended, it was my responsibility to then find my own job. And then I worked at different types of car part type of places, just kind of in college and in high school. I mean, and then in college, I've always had a job since 15 and a half, pretty much. And so that's part of my dad. I'm sure I complained and kicked and screamed, but I'm glad he made me have that job. And I just knew, like, when I first got my first paycheck, it was such an amazing feeling, 15 and a half. It just meant I had money. And of course I didn't know what to do with it. I spent it all, but just the fact that it was proof of what they taught me as a kid. Like I could work and I can earn. And that was pretty cool.
So he didn't teach you really to save it at that point.
I think the saving aspect, like transparently, again, I love my parents, and they actually were the first people to become millionaires in the Brambila tree. They did it in a way I don't know if it's possible anymore today. They were so good at saving, but they never really invested into the stock market. So they just did T-notes and bonds. And that's why I say I don't know if someone could do that same thing today, because rates were a little bit different and better. Maybe you could, maybe you can't. It depends how good at saving you are. Like you have to be really diligent. Whereas like I know if they would invest in the stock market, it could have been even better. But regardless, they taught me about earning. And then my dad, there was like saving culture because I was seeing my parents doing it. But as far as like, investing, that was something I had to kind of learn on my own.
So I guess the saving teaching was through the way they behaved, or there weren't like lessons or that like in a more formal kind of way or conversations. It was more through the way that they behaved.
I believe so. They
Okay.
were the examples. I think I don't remember. I can't recall childhood. Oh yeah, my dad pulled me aside and talked about the birds and the butterflies, and also I need to save 30% of every dollar I make. it it was more of my parents. I knew it was like the culture of the household was like we worked and then we saved, but I feel like working was probably more working to earn, and saving. There wasn't anything besides the culture of like you have to do it, but not the tactics. Or I didn't grow up with those.
Interesting. Who got the PlayStation for you? Just out of curiosity. That's a nice.
That was very nice. Probably was my mom. My
Was mom the spender, or was she also good?
Also amazing. If I have aligned this in my marriage too, and I think it's because I just saw it as this is what the only marriage I saw was my parents so closely, and they both were such good savers. In fact, to be really frank, a problem that they're having right now is they're having trouble spending money because they started taking Social Security. They're not working full time for me anymore. They're now part time, and now they can't spend money because they're still thinking about how they were, which got them to the point of having financial independence. So both of them were so frugal growing up. I just saw that, and I knew like it was smart to save, and I used to think maybe that's gonna be my problem, spending money. And I do feel like I do spend money on experiences, and I'm pretty lavish in that actually. So, and now it's so weird for me, especially on a finance podcast where I'm trying to tell my parents, hey, you actually need to spend money. And I've said a couple very insane things to them to help them spend. I said, Mom and Dad, if you guys leave me enough money for a Lamborghini, I'm going to buy a Lamborghini. So you better spend your money. And then I'll say something that's really crude. I've actually never done drugs in my whole life. I've never smoked a cigarette. Like I'm super clean. I've always been a good boy. But as a really crude joke to my parents, I say, you know what? I've never done hardcore drugs, but if you leave me a lot of money, I'm going to try it all. And I say these things as a joke to get them to spend money. Obviously, I would never actually do that, but I'm just trying to say, Mom and Dad, it's now time for you to all the work that you put in, like you got to spend it.
And that's a very difficult switch, is to go when you're earning money, it's easier to spend money because you see money coming in. When you go into retirement and you see a nest egg and you go, this has to survive until I die, is a very different mindset shift of actually spending that down. And you have to think differently. And it's funny because people who own stocks, bonds, probably even CDs, have a tougher time. Maybe not so with CDs, but CDs don't pay these days. So whatever. They have a tougher time spending than, let's say, somebody built a real estate portfolio and had 10 homes. Like they see that money coming in and they're like, well, this money's going to keep coming in all the time, so I can spend it. And it's kind of that quirk there of life and how that comes to be. You know what we tell people, and you don't need to answer this question, but I'm guessing they're either for one of the two presidential candidates. You can always say that you're gonna donate their inheritance to the other one. That usually gets the house fired up.
I haven't thought of that. You know what? I'm going to try that one next. And then
Yeah.
I like that. That's great.
It does help because that we use that when elderly parents don't want to write out their wills and they don't want to put down because that's a lot of facing death. So we're like, all right, do whatever you want, but we're probably gonna cremate you, throw your ashes over there, and give your money to that political party or whatever thing they hate most.
Oh my gosh, that's a good one.
Then they're like a little bit more inspired. So we're here today to talk about your book. What inspired you both to kind of come together to write the book, Start Thinking Rich?
Well, so Adrian and I met on TikTok. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, but we actually did. And we were sort of early on the app, creating content related to financial literacy, financial psychology, mindset around money. I think we were started to comment in each other's videos. There weren't a lot of people on there as a matter of fact, there were a lot of people on there doing terrible advice around money. And so I immediately saw him as like a kindred spirit in terms of the education. Like he's trying to bring his message to young people. So that's how we initially connected. And we met in person. Adrian is perhaps most famous for making $1.7 million in 1 year while living in a van, which is a fabulous story. And we actually met in person when he and his wife were on his way cross country to pick up his van. And so that's when we hung out, and then it's sort of grown from there. But really, this book is something that we've been working on for a couple of years. Each chapter is its own little thesis, a standalone piece of information. And we're really designed it. So both of us have successful businesses, and our bills are getting paid, and everything's great. And as you might know this, Rocky, you don't make a lot of money in books. Maybe
you make money in books. I didn't even know you
don't
could.
make a lot of money. Exactly. We're not doing. The book isn't meant to be a huge revenue generator, although it probably will be, right? But it's really meant to try to impact as many people as possible. And so we tried to frame the chapters in ways that are sort of like shocking at first, to try to snap people out of a poor mindset or a way of thinking about things that has been shown by the research to not be very effective. And then we tried to make each chapter sort of like a warm hug, so we've got the tough love approach with the book. That was sort of our vision.
Yeah, I noticed that all the chapter titles were a little bit provocative. Is that the right word?
Yes. I think, just to rattle off a few, if we entice you or offend you, we apologize, but it's truly meant with intention behind. If you want to get rich, you have to get rid of your poor friends. Ouch. But we explain that. We can dive in that later. Or your political party doesn't give a shit about you. They're never going to take you to financial freedom. And
unless, your parents didn't write their will.
Right.
Brad, you got any favorite ones?
Yeah, so we, the political party is apropos for what's going on. We have one that complaining is for losers. It's like, and one of my favorite ones is you don't want to become a millionaire. You just want to spend $1 million. And that's a mindset test that we ask the reader at the start. If Adrian and I gave you $1 million, what would you do with it? And depending on your answer, we can kind of put you in a rich mindset or a poor mindset category.
I'd probably just add it to the stock portfolio.
The rich mindset.
Ding, 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 ding. The poor mindset takes out the calculator and starts subtracting all the money from all the stuff they're going to buy. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to swear at my boss, on the way out, and then come back and beg for it, a year later. And the rich mindset invests it and maybe uses the 4% rule. If you want to take money out now, maybe you just let it grow into multi-millions, or you take out $40,000 a year. And that's what you use to invest in that business that, statistically speaking, is probably going to fail until you do it about 5 or 6 times. And the poor mindset say, I'm going to take $500,000 and I'm going to go start a business. And it's like, odds are against you. So we're really trying to shift people's mindset around blowing up some of the myths that are really common. And so we're both, we have several million followers on social media between the two of us. And it's, we're trying to re-educate, if you will, young people, especially that are on social media, just being fed all these lies, and they're so toxic. And we talked about this the last time we chatted, Rocky. It's like there's so much toxic information out there that just sets people up for failure. And so we're trying to be the voice of reason and trying to get people to pay attention, which is why we landed on some provocative titles. And by the way, we stand by all of them, but they're sort of meant to try to snap you out of a poor mindset.
I was surprised you said that poor people take out a calculator and start subtracting, because I didn't think they would even bother with the calculator. I just figured they go spend, because they think $1 million would last me a lifetime, right? Because the stats show they blow through it like that.
Yeah.
Yep. And we do talk about, when we're picking on poor people, by the way, I was poor for much of my life. We're differentiating that between that and broke. So like a poor mindset, is where you have twisted thinking around money, and broke is just merely that you have no money. And so a lot of us have been broke. We actually, and people too, Rocky, that have, millions of dollars or 6-figure incomes, and they have a poor mindset and they're just spending it all. And we count that. That's in the category of poor in our definition. Broke is a temporary condition that you can recover from.
And that is true. That was my original business idea, helping poor rich people. Turns out they don't want help. So I'll just leave it to you. They can buy the book. The one chapter that I don't see in here, and it came up because of what Adrian said about his parents. Don't marry a spendthrift spouse.
We're already in so much trouble. We do talk about marriage in the book, though. We absolutely do. And, statistically speaking, I think it's between ages 25 and 35, married people have 10 times the net worth as single people, which is just like, whoa. But again, we're not suggesting you necessarily get married, but we try to present some of that analyses, and we talk about why. Like sometimes just having a partner, this happens to me, and we're talking about people who are afraid to spend money. My wife's coming into my life. I ended up with a couch. I had lawn chairs before I met my wife. And so she helped me balance out some extreme, I'd say probably scarcity thinking I had going on. And quite often, if you do have a spender, they can be somewhat restrained by marrying somebody who's a little bit more focused on saving. And sometimes we seek to balance each other out, which is sort of the ideal.
I like it. One of the things that you start off with is that 90% of millionaires are self-made. And I think, especially today, and you see it a lot in the politics, let's tax all the rich people and, they're bad and evil. But yet the reality is most of them started from very humble beginnings.
Absolutely. The word rich is always has some stank on it, when people talk about it. And it's sort of, what is the definition of rich? And it's like, well, somebody who has more than you do, but they don't really deserve it. That's sort of how we tend to experience that word as a culture. At least it seems like that to me. But it's certainly like, our first chapter is Being Poor Sucks. And we run through all the stats on why it actually sucks, And so we actually want everyone to be rich. We feel like it's first it starts with a mindset, and really it comes to what we talk about is that rich people really value time. And so, Adrian has his definition of rich. I'd love to hear your definition of rich, Rocky. For me, it's like the more of your time you own, the richer you are, in my opinion, because you have more choice in what you're going to be doing and how you're spending time, and you're less tied down to the day-to-day struggle for survival.
And I would concur. I think being rich is having time freedom and also having money freedom to do what you want. Not to say I'm going to be in a private jet and I'm going to do all these wild, crazy things, but being able to cover comfortable lifestyle and take care of, if you've got kids, your kids' needs, and living, we'll call it modest is relative. Living not an extravagant life, but a reasonable life. And that's always kind of good. It's funny because when you think about people who live in really big houses, one of the things you'll notice is nobody's in the family room. And so you're not while you may have a nice house, if everyone's gone to their corners, nobody knows what the hell's going on with anybody. There's no family unit there living, so to speak.
I think the one thing I'll mention when you mention, especially with politics, rich people are evil. I actually learned this from Brad. He pioneered this concept called money scripts. They are based on how we inherit our perceptions of money. And one of them that's a toxic one, we talk about this in the book as a poor mindset, is if you think rich or wealthy people are bad, inherently bad because they have that. And if that's the way you think, of course, why you have no incentive, because you want to think you're a good person. You're never going to basically try to make money and try to save and try to invest and do the smart things. I think one of the best ways I get to spend money is by helping others and gifting. And I know that the more money I make, I get to make a bigger impact. I like to think I'm a good person. I don't think I'm the same good person as I was when I was broke. And now I don't believe I've changed. I believe I get to make more impact of who I was. I think the thing of rich people being evil is not true at all. In fact, it's a person who's broke, who's an ass, starts to make money. Guess what? They're just become a bigger ass. It's money's not going to cure them and make them kind all of a sudden. So it's these mindsets of how we think about money and our perceptions that really affect our day-to-day behavior, even on an unconscious level. If you think rich people are bad and evil, you're probably doing a lot of things personally bad with your money to prevent you from gaining, whether you know it or not.
And I learned a lot of that from Brad as well, including his wonderful book, The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge. And it's funny, and we've talked about that in the past, of how you look at people and who actually is good with money, who isn't, and your philosophy and so forth with regards to that. At the beginning of the book, though, you do define what a rich mindset is. You want to just touch on that real quick?
Yeah, I feel, it's a rich mindset is somebody who has, to a degree, a future orientation. This is part of it. This is a real important part where you have very clear vision of your goals for the future. And you have to have those, otherwise you're not going to be motivated to make any sacrifices right now. A rich mindset is somebody who looks at money as a tool to facilitate achieving their values. They are frugal in the sense that they're not living outside of their means. They are aware of traps related to debt, like credit card debt, like the most toxic types of debt. They steer away from those, and they have a plan. They have a plan for the future. And I think the plan is super, super important, because if you don't have a plan for anything, you're going absolutely nowhere. Compared to a poor mindset is much more focused on immediate experience now, foregoing sacrifice. You don't worry about the future. They don't have clear vision of the future. Sometimes they have a sense of hopelessness, a sense of helplessness. A rich mindset will have more of an internal locus of control, believing that, okay, so the mistakes in my life are due to me. Maybe if there's something I missed, maybe there's some knowledge I don't have. Maybe I was attracted to a business prospect that in retrospect was too good to be true, but there was something inside of me that was desperate, right? So they're willing to introspect and to take responsibility so that they don't keep making the same mistakes over and over. Poor mindset is more likely to place blame on other people and just find themselves repeating terrible financial experiences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And over time, for me, I know I had to learn a lot of it. Parts of it I had, parts of it I didn't. My biggest ahas were just the fact that there were money mindsets. I just assumed everyone was taught about money and so forth, because in our family, they did that. And it's funny because in one of the chapters, you talk about teachers, which is kind of where we start, what you learn in school. You guys say teachers can't teach you money.
Yes, we talk about teachers as well as bosses and people that work at jobs, and we even have an angle that people that work at jobs probably aren't financially free, because most people, if they have financial freedom, you really have to love your job to basically do it out of financial freedom and by choice. So this is what we talk about teachers that you inherit in school, grade school, college. They're working a job because they usually have to. So the expectation to get that advice of financial freedom for someone who isn't financially free, it's kind of like a contradiction. And it's not that by the way, we love teachers. So we have to be careful with all of our headlines to never offend. Teaching is a great profession. I consider myself a teacher. I've taught over 60,000 students online in my classes. Brad's also a teacher. So we are teachers. And our specific context is financial freedom. And really it goes into a locus of control that the standard status quo, your standard teachers, they have no obligation, and they're not the right people to teach you how to achieve financial freedom. They can teach you about history and art and math and science and all these other things that are very awesome. But in terms of being financially free, no one that's in a public system typically is there that's financially free because they want to by choice and want you to teach you how to be financially free. It just doesn't exist. And so it's a problem. And the only way to solve it is to have that desire and to go chase it. So again, that example I shared at the beginning of the podcast here is like, I had the desire, and because of my professor, I reached out to him outside the classroom. And that's where I learned my first financial vehicle, a Roth IRA, right? Typically your average teacher is not going to bake that in the curriculum. You have to have the desire to say, hey, how do I save? How do I make money? How do I not have to worry about bills? The better questions you ask, the better answers you're going to get. And that will set you on the path.
The other thing is I think for a lot of teachers, they're all looking at when can I retire? And they're not saving for retirement because they're counting on a pension. And even if you go to college professors, if they're tenured professors, they're in that same kind of attitude of that type of space. And so their mindset's different. It's not to say it's good or bad. It's just they went into a system that thinks this way. And I think you talked about it before, the people around you are the people who influence you. If that's all the people around you, then that's the influence you get and the mindsets that you get from that.
Yeah. And if you want to be a teacher, they're the best people to ask. Like, how do I become a teacher? How do I become a professor? It's just, if you're going to ask your boss how to be financially free, well, first of all, why would they want you financially free? I mean, like, what, they're going to have to, do you know how much it costs to train your replacement? No, thanks. And then secondly, are they financially free? I mean, I don't know, they're working. Adrian, likes to bring up the point, and we were just talking about it earlier. And some entrepreneurs, like, they're so glad they got rid of their 9 to 5, and now they're working 80 hours a week. Is like, is that freedom? I mean, they don't have to deal with their boss, but now they're working twice as much. So it's really about finding that person who's at least a step or two ahead of where you are, where you want to be. They're closer to it, and that's who you find to ask the questions to. Like my parents, love them all. They were teachers. And I remember my stepdad took me aside when I got out of college with my bachelor's in psychology, which only made sense if I went on to get a doctorate, because you don't make much money with a bachelor's in psychology. But he told me that you need to get a federal job, Brad. That's what you need to do. And he wanted me to go work in a prison. That was his vision for me. And he did it out of love, because he was a teacher and he saw at least 10 people get all excited about this job. They're, this entrepreneurial venture they're going to go to. So then they left the teaching profession. And a couple of years later, they had to crawl back in, and he sees them in the hallway, and it's, there's shame that their job, their entrepreneur venture failed, and they had to come in at a lower rate, than they were getting paid before. And so he saw all those stories. And so in his mind, it's like, hey, become a teacher, work in a federal prison. That's my vision for you, because I love you so much.
And it's funny, parents want safety over success, and they're perfectly content with that. By the way, for our entrepreneurs, what I teach is work less, make more, because it's possible. You just have to do the math. It's actually quite easy. And that was my biggest aha. I always assumed that business owners understood the business of business. Turns out they're just like regular people. They went into business to do what they loved, and money wasn't part of the conversation. Or they were carrying all this baggage that everyone else is carrying, and they didn't realize what it really took.
Well, I'll say this too. Like, again, I feel bad about bashing teachers. I'm not. I actually became a millionaire working in the public school system. That's when I got my first $1 million in net worth, working as a psychologist in a high school, which I absolutely loved, by the way. Miss all those kids. So it's absolutely possible, but the system is not designed to teach you to do that. You have to go outside of the system to try to learn how to do it, and which you need to do. But that's our sort of take with teachers and bosses. Be careful. They can teach you what they know, but they can't teach you what they don't know.
And that's so true. So one of the things you also talk about in there, and I've seen this personally, is Americans versus immigrants when it comes to money and behaviors and attitudes. Love for you to expound on that.
I think I've learned through doing so many podcasts with Brad, he has a very, he goes back to his family ancient history, because we all are essentially immigrants here. And his family came on the Mayflower. And I'm kind of stealing your lines here, Brad, but I laughed the first time you said this, is how come your family doesn't own like half of America?
Right. Yeah, I was struck by that as a kid, right? Like, why are both my sets of my grandparents living in mobile home parks when we've been here for how many hundreds of years? Like, I don't know. And we also say this too, and you can't compete with an immigrant. You just can't. Like, good luck. Some of the richest people I know are immigrants. And Adrian will tell about his family history, which is so inspiring. But like, the richest person that I know personally, is a billionaire, and came over to this country, second grade, failed second grade, couldn't speak English, had every systemic barrier that you can possibly imagine just placed right directly in his path. And he did things, though, that the average American, and even as I said it, your listener would be like, it's not worth $1 billion. I'm not going to do that. I mean, he was saving 95% of his income. He was working at a fast food restaurant. He's like, someday I'm going to own this restaurant. Meanwhile, I don't know what the other 15-year-olds were in there thinking, probably about how they're going to party that night and blow their paycheck. And he saved every dime he had. He became a mechanic, not because he wanted to become a mechanic, but because that paid a high hourly rate. And then he saved 5-7 years, rode the bus, slept on the floor, ate ramen noodles, and saved 95% of his income, bought that restaurant, and now owns hundreds of them. And it's like, there it is. I just gave you the path to becoming a billionaire. And most Americans, most people grow up in the US are like, well, that's rather uncomfortable. I don't think I really want it that bad. And we actually talk about that in the book. Hey, just admit you don't want it that bad. Like, I don't want it that bad. So the immigrant story is so incredibly inspiring. But Adrian has his own family story.
Yes, my dad immigrated here when he was 13, but my grandma is actually the person I try to give spotlight to, because my dad's dad was murdered when he was around 5 years old. So my grandma, 4 kids, was kind of doing these month to 5 month long commute to the US to try to save enough money to eventually get all of her kids here. And that finally happened when my dad was 13. And it's crazy. I sometimes get so frustrated when I see comments, especially right now, we're in an election year. And so political content is all over the place. And it's just so frustrating to me to where people's energy right now is on. It's all these external things, it's all problems and complaints. I know there's problems in the country. I do. But in the immigrant lens, I did not immigrate here, but I feel like I've tried to do my best job to have this immigrant mindset where like I know there's problems, but I have immense pressure. I know that this place, this country is a place where I can change my class. I can make it happen through work ethic. And that's what I've done. I've always felt, knowing my dad's sacrifice and my grandma's sacrifice, I have an immense pressure to do well. Like I am not meant to be a bum. Like it would be so shameful to the culture of, it would be so shameful for me to be a loser that complains and is like into the political message, just whining about everything. It's like, no, I don't have time for that. My grandma, like she sacrificed. My dad came here when he was 13, immigrating here. Like I have to do well. I have to crush. I have to change my family tree. They gave me a platform that they did not have. It is my only option to do it. And I feel like that's this immigrant mindset. Like this is the place to do it. We left the bad place. This is the good place. We can actually make it happen. We couldn't do it in Mexico. So I feel that I carry this immense pressure, and I've done every part to give thanks to my parents, and hiring them was super great. Because my parents are such good workers. My dad and mom, they probably would have never left their jobs, despite my dad having an hour and a half commute there and back, and my mom also having 60-minute commute and traffic and people and stress. My dad worked at the dealership of Toyota his whole life, until I was like, Dad. And I had to say it this way, Dad, I really need your help with my business. And he felt like he could help. And he was, when I say hire my parents, it's not like I worked them 80 hours. They're working they've always worked, partial hours for full-time pay. And it's just something I love. It's an excuse essentially on my end to help them and give thanks to them and collaborate with them. But like, it's just the beginning. I still feel the beginning. I feel like this pressure to do well, to instead of focusing on the negative, focus on myself and how to change. And I don't think you need to be an immigrant or come from immigrants to have that mindset. It's just more of a flip of the switch. Like what is more productive for you, to focus on your financial independence, to work hard, to learn how to save, to learn how to be good with money, to learn how to do a side hustle, or to spend your time up to date with the politics of the world on a systematic level? I don't know. You tell me.
I was going to say too, it's a great metaphor. Like the whole immigrant idea is a great metaphor for going from lower income to middle class to higher income too. It's almost like you are an immigrant. You're going to have to leave a certain way of thinking, a certain way of behaving. You're going to have to learn a new language, the language of investing. You're going to have to meet new people that perhaps you were never exposed to in the past, such as financial planners or CPAs or attorneys. And it's almost like going to another culture too. And we're sort of wired to stay within our family system and within our socioeconomic tribe. And that's one of the challenges for many of us climbing the socioeconomic ladder, is we might suffer from things like I call do-it-yourself-itis, which is sort of we've noticed one of our chapter titles is Only Poor People Are Afraid to Ask for Help. And again, this is a poor mindset. And it really comes down to the cultural experience of being low income, where you do it all yourself. And what's so fascinating is people who are higher income, higher net worth, they are much more comfortable saying, oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to hire somebody to help me. I'm going to consult with somebody. And it's sort of funny because you'd think I can't afford it, but here's the deal. I know you got pliers in your garage, but if your tooth hurts, I bet you're going to go to a dentist, and I feel like that's probably the approach you should take when it comes to doing your taxes, for example. Go to an expert.
And I agree with you. I don't know about the dentist. Some of those poor people do some wild things. Having been around the world, I will say I think we have the richest poor people in the world. And I don't think they realize how rich they are from a worldwide standpoint or from an income standpoint. It's night and day. I think that's because that's what we see all the time. We've been brainwashed into what is average and what's normal for the world and kind of what's rich. Adrian, do you have kids?
I do have a daughter. She's in heaven, though.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Me too.
I just wasn't sure, because my question was going to be, and maybe Brad, the answer to that is, as you go up these ladders and then you have kids who've never seen that part of it, how do you keep the grit? How do you keep, because they get pretty fat and happy pretty soon.
They really do. And I'll tell you, one of the things I do most when I work with people, like, so I do some coaching and is are train wrecks when it comes to this. So it's people who are kind of like me, kind of like Adrian, who are having a different experience in life, and then, but, we want to give the next generation like all the stuff we didn't have, all the experience. And by the way, I'm tempted to do this too. There's a lot of stuff I didn't have, like being poor sucks, as we mentioned, chapter 1. And I wanted to take karate lessons. And so for my birthday, my mom got me karate lessons. Now, by the way, this isn't like some sort of fancy dojo. This was at the rec center, in my working class town. And month 3 came up, and she's like, "Yeah, sorry, that's it. No more money for that. That was your birthday present." I was so devastated. Like, I was like, I can't believe it. And I'm like, I don't want that to have that experience for my kids. So the benefit is I've seen people who've been creating financial dependence in their children who are now in their 40s and 50s, and it's just so difficult. But I'm at risk. I'm at high risk for that. Most people who, in the studies we've shown, most people who are enabling people tend to have grown up in lower socioeconomic environments. Now they have some money, and we're not sure how to make sure that money helps and doesn't hurt. And so I don't know that I'm doing a great job. I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. Time will tell. But I'm doing everything I can in my power to make sure that, they do chores. They don't just get money for nothing. That's essentially it. They do chores. And when I give them money, they can't just go buy anything. They have to invest that money. And reluctantly, I might let them spend some. My wife and I argue about this a little bit. She's like, they should be able to spend it. I'm like, yeah, if they invest it all, I'm happy. And literally my 11-year-old the other day said, well, I don't really need anything. And then he pulled out a compound interest calculator and showed my wife how much money this would be worth, 30 years from now. And I was just like beaming with pride. I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. But yeah, it's something I'm thinking about all the time, because it's really easy for people who grew up poor to not know how to create that grit. Because the other thing is too, I don't want my kids to have to suffer like I suffered. And so I'm not going to let that happen. But also I want to make sure they get the mindset. And so I'll use sports, for example, to help with the grit. And how do you think through that? How do you think through struggling? I push my son to be a pitcher. And my wife's like, oh my gosh, it's so stressful out there. I said, I know. I want him to be in a stressful environment so that he can work on his self-talk and figure out how to perform. I could care less about baseball, by the way. I'm just trying to put my kids in environments that are push them and stress them out so that I can help them work through the mindset of how do I improve. And I tell my kids all the time, you suck at everything. You're terrible. Oh no, I'm not so good at soccer. I'm like, well, yeah, you suck. Like, you've been playing for a month. I mean, don't you think, who could possibly be good playing for a month? And so my kids have no problem knowing that they're terrible at doing certain things, because we all are, until we have practice and invest time and energy into it.
Do you think your son is going to struggle with spending money when he's got a lot of money in the future? Because that's a fine line back and forth. And I've noticed that with my kids. My daughter took the lesson one way. My son took the lesson a different way. And my wife always gets yelled at for spending too much by the kids, which is good by me, but, sometimes causes other problems.
Yeah. So in the world of money problems, I think that's the best one to have. Is it ideal? Like balance is important. And my children are seeing this modeled for them too. Like I sort of get his scenario. It's like, hey, you're paying for all the stuff I really need. I'm going to shove this over here. But, I'm also doing my best to model, that we're going to have experiences. So we're going to go to Hawaii a couple times a year. That's where my wife's from, and that's where my in-laws are. We're going to go out to eat, because this is a good experience. Isn't this incredible? Aren't we blessed that we can enjoy this because we've been saving and investing, et cetera? So I'm trying to model for them what has been a struggle for me. And that is, but I'm getting better at it, is like, isn't this a comfy couch, compared to the lawn chairs that I would have in here if it wasn't for your mother? So, money is to be spent too. It's not just to be saved and invested. It is to be spent. So, but I do worry about that a little bit with him.
And, I find it's a back and forth, and you've got to show both sides. And then we let our kids spend money when they were young, but they had a spending bucket. So your spending bucket's your spending bucket to do as you choose. Here's your savings bucket. And their savings bucket was like 50%. So it's not like they had a big savings bucket and a reasonable spending bucket, and they got to choose between the two. So they learned both skills. The other thing, though, is when people get money, they want to help poor people. And yet that also seems to be a bit of a struggle. because it's funny because I work with employers and they're like, well, we want to give our people a bonus or give them more money. And it seems like every time they give them more money, performance goes down. It's the weirdest thing. And then you get this expectation for getting stuff. And there's plenty of stories where, you could take Adrian's situation and it hasn't happened to him, but they grew up in a situation like him and they buy the parents a house one day. And then the parents call up and go, where's the furniture? And then you put the furniture in there like, well, who's going to cut the lawn? Right? You didn't really address that in the book though, did you? Or have you seen that?
I feel like the book is not for everyone. Can the book help someone that has financial freedom? I don't think so. It's going to just be a refresher, right? We're trying to get people to financial freedom. If you just look at the average American stats, how much lack of savings they have, how much credit card debt they have, how much no 401k they have, that's who we're trying to serve. So this interesting phase that I hope everyone listening to gets to, where now you have abundance and now you want to bless the people around you. I do it. I love doing it. I fly my parents first class to go places. I love gifting them experiences. I feel like I'm not flowering them with objects, and it's just because I have innate minimalism background. I did live in a van for a year. And I do feel like the more stuff you own, the more it owns you. But I am lavish when it comes to experiences. I just got back from 3 months of Japan. I lived abroad for a year. And when it comes to my family, I will go to I will drop $2,000 on a dinner to treat them to the nicest meals they've ever had. And I don't blink. I love doing that. But I think also, this is just speaking for my family, it's never an expectation like, oh, we're hanging out with Adrian again. Like, I hope he takes us somewhere nice, because I think if I did start to experience that, I know it would never happen. But if even from a friend, or because I'm always generous with the people around, if I ever got the hint that it was an expectation now, it would change my affection for it. Would change it. It wouldn't feel like as authentic gift. No one wants to feel, when you're gifting something, you don't want to feel like that's it. Like that's a sour grapes kind of thing. But because I used to think when you get to financial freedom and you don't have to worry about bills or your time or your boss that you don't like you actually have to do some really deep soul searching, because now you don't have money problems. You're going to have other life problems, but money problems are all gone. That opens up a lot of your time. So then you start to wonder on life's biggest question: what is my purpose and what do I do? And typically, I think a great path a lot of very successful people go to is they think about their impact in the world. And this is where we think of gifting. And I think out of all the things you can spend money on, gifting is, I think, the best way. I think gifting is way more endorphins than receiving, but also experiences, I think. And those two things are really big. And we project the idea in the book that this is what you want to aspire to. But I feel like that when you're there, that could be a whole nother book. I'm seeing it right now with my parents, having enough money coming in and still being frugal and not now knowing how to spend that money. That's a whole book that needs to solve those problems and challenges, I think.
You talk about this van, but I have to ask, was this like a fully tricked out Mercedes van, like to the hilt?
Yeah, it was fully decked out. I had a queen size bed in it, a shower, solar panels on top. It's we're selling it right now it's like $80,000 van. So we lived in it for a full year. That's how I gained 1 million followers talking about van life. And it wasn't an SNL skit joke anymore. It was actually a trendy, cool thing to do. And I just happened to be living in one. So that's why kind of my personal brand blew up from there.
I just had to know. I wanted to. So, one of the big arguments today that is out there, and there are constant back and forth on this, is college. And is it worth it? And what's the return on the investment? And I'd love to hear, because I think you talk a little bit about that in the book.
We do. So first of all, I'm kind of anxious because, Rocky, we might get into a little debate here. You and me, baby. So I think, so first of all, the stats are the average college grad makes 1.2 million more during their lifetime. Now, you might ask, where do you get this number? Is that old data? Well, that is data from last year. And that is when you ask people how much money they're making. Department of Labor does a study, how much money they're making each week. And I just simply did the math on it. Right. And so what you see is a curve where the more education you get, the more money you make. Now, there's not a huge difference between like a master's and a doctorate degree, which makes me question whether I needed the doctorate degree. But statistically speaking, I don't like it when I see people on the internet just giving random advice saying, college isn't worth it anymore. Because every time I see it, I'm like, is it not worth it anymore? Let me go check. Oops, I guess it still is. I'm not sure what agenda we're trying to promote here. That said, I make a lot of videos on this too, and I get lots of crap for it because if your major's on the list, people get really mad, especially professors. Like the worst comments I've ever gotten on social media were from professors. And it's because I called out their degree and basically I'm just reporting the stats. So the ones that earn the least, that are the most regretted, unfortunately are the ones that are the most fun, the ones and sometimes that do the most benefit for society, like psychology, sociology, early childhood education, fine arts, performing arts, all these things that are actually wonderful, the humanities. But those types of degrees, you got to be really careful because if you're going to go borrow $50,000 for a degree in those areas, and you're going to stop at a bachelor's degree, you could be really setting yourself up for failure. Social work is another example. Some of these make less than minimum wage or at least minimum wage. So is college worth it in general? Yes. Is it worth it for everyone? Absolutely not. And so you need to approach college as a business decision, unless your parents are rich and you don't need money and it's just you want to explore this thing to make the world a better place, which is fabulous. It's a business decision. So you got to run the numbers.
And I agree with you. It's a business decision. I will challenge you on causation versus correlation. It depends on the kid, right? You got a young man who's good with his hands and likes to fix things. You can make six figures as a master mechanic. You do not need to go to college. I think Starbucks is full of college grads being baristas. Again, it's
a
right
good theory.
Degree.
I think you're probably right.
Right degree. And then the cost of the degree. You said borrow 50 grand and I laughed because that's like year one, right?
Well, I go for average numbers, but yeah, I agree. I agree.
That per year, not total, depending on the kid, because a lot of people who grew up without money are told college is your ticket out, but they aren't shown how to be successful in college. So they end up in college where they don't do well or they pick the wrong majors. They end up in massive debt and they don't have a path forward. Whereas had they gone somewhere else, they would have. And then the second problem that happens in colleges is depending on the colleges, they may accept certain minorities to fill their quotas that aren't qualified. So now the kid really struggles in that particular situation. Again, this is why it's so specific to the person, to the degree, to the school. We told our kids, my son and I still argue about this. I'm like, I'm not paying for Harvard, or am I? Actually, for him, it was, I'm not paying for MIT and I'm not paying for Carnegie Mellon. I go 75, 80K a year, which was 4 or 5 years ago. I go, there's not a return on it. He challenges me and says there is. He got out and he's making money. Now he's going for his master's and he's at Georgia Tech online. I'm like, dude, why didn't you go to Carnegie Mellon? He's like, well, that's expensive. I'm like, no. Right? So yes, it does open certain doors, but I think in today's world, and Adrian probably knows this, well, you do too, right? You can connect with the world on social media. You can get into different connections, different groups. The doors are no longer locked like they used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think it's very much of an individual decision. And you really got to sit down and run the numbers because I don't think it's that straight cut. But you can argue with me. You have the mic.
I think Rocky would. I was hardcore no college, despite having gone to college. I'm an internet entrepreneur, multiple online businesses. When I hire people, I don't care if they went to college. It's not something that I look for. I'm looking for, can they do? We've hired programmers and things like that. But after working with Brad, I feel like we're trying to look at data overall. I think over the next 30 years, the stats could change. But right now, as we look at the stats today, when Brad's always great at slapping me with the data. That's what we work so great together. And he's pioneered a lot of some of these money concepts that you see in almost every single finance book. If they're giving proper footnotes, you'll see Brad's name in a lot of these books. And so, yeah, this one where now I feel like I'm kind of in the middle, but I do feel like there's bad degrees you can get. And, one thing I always talk in my content is like, if you want to be in business, you're going to be in sales. The best thing to do is start selling, create an online business. There's really no cost to trying to create a media company and launch on YouTube. And you'll learn so much in doing that. And I feel like then there's the traditional jobs like doctors and things like you do need to go to school. So it definitely is now a more nuanced answer. It's not a one size fits all approach like it was many years ago. And I think it's going to continue to be more nuanced, and maybe the data will change. But Brad's definitely opened up my eyes on that one, where now I'm not as extreme. Now I feel like I'm more moderate in that argument.
Well, and I'm going to hedge my bet. So I'm definitely sending my kids to college. And also I'm sending them to Uncle Adrian's house for the summer. And I'm going to say, mow his grass, watch his windows. And at night, just have him spend an hour a day teaching you how to make millions of dollars online. So that's my plan. I don't know if I ever told you that, Adrian.
Sounds good.
See, Adrian, I would send them to show up and just be with you all day and bring you coffee and figure out how to post the latest TikTok and have them be a little more involved in that than mowing the lawn, because they'll learn a lot more watching all day. It's those little things that nobody talks about that when you're there that you kind of tend to see. I don't know if they've done this study, but I would love to see a study that said the kid qualified to go to college. He was able to go to college, and he chose not to. How do they do versus that? I know they have studies, and I've heard plus and minus on it, but a kid who could have gone to Ivy League and chose not to supposedly does just as well, if not better. There's, again, statistics lie. So we're not going to go there. But
yeah,
I think it's a big question. Is there anything that we should have touched on or insulted people over from your book that we didn't get a chance to?
I mean, we read the chapter titles. We're always like, your own, it's, I think we covered a lot of the fun stuff. We have chapter titles in there, like I said, complaining is for losers. We have a chapter where it's basically titled, get a roommate, get on the bus, get sober, get bald, get a side hustle, or shut up about being poor. And in that chapter, we look at the average stats that Americans pay for rent, for cars, for alcohol, for going to the salon. We then talk about if you just invested that money instead, and the number is $2.8 million in 25 years, just by riding the bus versus getting one roommate. I mean, the message we're giving is that if you're saying you can't afford to invest, we are dying to have a conversation with you, perhaps on YouTube, to help you try to find ways for you to revise that. I certainly would rather not have a bunch of roommates. I'm bald by choice. But look, if I couldn't afford to invest, I'd be looking at doing that. And I've certainly had roommates in the past. And if things go wrong, I'll have them in the future, just because we truly believe that financial freedom is available for every person listening to this, every person who wants it, if you just have the right mindset. And part of what we're trying to do is this book is not meant to insult people. I get a lot of emails and DMs, and I know Adrian does too, from people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And sometimes this book can really feel like a slap in the face, because it's like, just realizing I've made mistakes and I have all this lost time. And, first of all, we do believe that you can do a lot in 10, 15 years. We think you can radically transform what your post-work life is going to look like by getting on it today. But I think really too, and it probably comes through by the fact that we have so many followers on TikTok. If we can catch you earlier, if we can catch you just coming out of college, and you have this mindset like, oh, I'm going to save and invest 30% of every dollar I make. You're going to feel rich when you get out of school, when you get your first job. And if you just have that mindset, you're going to be a multimillionaire. So you can work at McDonald's and be a multimillionaire. We've run the numbers on it just with that mindset. And so we're trying to catch as many people as we can as early as we can.
McDonald's pays a lot these days. Minimum wage is through the roof. All right, Adrian, what's your secret to living an abundant life?
I think if I look at my day-to-day, spend time working as much as I want to work. I spend time trying to do something new right now. That's jiu-jitsu. So I have a personal trainer doing that. I try to do something that keeps me hard. I think one problem of success is that we get soft because now everything's comfortable. So one quick example is I have a cold plunge, it's 33 degrees. I hop in it, it sucks, but it keeps me hard, in trying to do tough things. And I think as I look at my day, I have that day is designed how I want it to be. I don't know if it'll always be this way. I think we change. Maybe I'll break my arm in jiu-jitsu and be like, well, that's not fun. I'm not going to do that again. But I have the freedom of choice. And to me, that feels abundant, where no matter where my passions change, people come to my life. And if I want to alter, I have the freedom to do so. And to me, that's my definition of abundance.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think as an entrepreneur and from my background, I felt like I had to do everything myself. And this inability to let go, I think slowed my progress down over the decade of my entrepreneurship journey. I only started to really get good at letting go of tasks and outsourcing and building a team in the last few years. And what's happened the last few years? Exponential growth. I wish I would have known, like, hey, as soon as I start making more money, realizing that time is my most valuable asset, outsourcing it. And then the other thing too, this is really new, is not just my business. I realized after we lived in the van and we moved into Austin, Texas, and we have a home now, that my business was really optimized with people and my personal life wasn't. So here I was living my financial freedom life, doing chores, the dishes, yard work. I was like, whoa, wait a second. This is not my rich life. So then I started getting really good at, now we have a house admin. We have an assistant. We have someone that cleans. We have someone that, we even hired a chef, private chef. And these are things that, like, I thought that was a hard one being Mexican. I thought, man, I love cooking. Turns out I don't love cooking. I love eating. That's awesome. So realizing that time's the most valuable asset doesn't just apply to business, it applies to personal life. We were made so much more from just folding laundry and doing chores.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Actually, I thought of something better. I was going to say, try to invest your first dollar, because I think there's a lot of lessons to do it, like setting up your bank account, picking out a portfolio, and kind of doing a personality quiz. But I think the thing that's probably bigger is the way that things have always been done to achieve success. The traditional is traditional for a reason. It worked in the past. It doesn't mean it's going to work again in the future. And I think right now we're living in a very exciting time. There's a lot of ways to achieve success and financial freedom. And I mean creatively on ways to create income, especially online. And I think if you are 18 right now, that's so exciting because there's so many things you can learn. We're on the cusp of having AI employees, and there's new social medias that pop up where you're just literally 100 videos away from creating a whole media company. And so I think there's so much opportunity out there. You have to be willing to explore and just know that the traditional does work. There's also always innovation and ways to do it. And I think having that mindset, like, hey, you don't have to do what everyone else does. I think that's something that I lean on that more than just investing $1.
And I will say this because I've seen it. I don't care how much you make. How much do you keep?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, especially in business as well, if you're not saving it, it's gone. And life will smack you down every so often. And when you've got a nice pile of cash to handle that smackdown, things go a little smoother. If people would like to learn about you both, find the book, where should they go?
Our book is called Start Thinking Rich. You can search for that on Amazon. It's also going to be available where all books are available, or pick it up in store, Barnes & Noble. You can go to startthinkingrich.com/Rocky, where we're actually having a special bonus just for everyone here that we can say thank you to you, Rocky, and anyone that listens to you.
Thank you so much for doing that. We appreciate it. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.